Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Show It Off, the Power of Merchandising. I'm Jamie Mochik with the Wisconsin Valley Library Service, and we're so happy that you're taking your time out of probably a busy day to join us for this presentation. This presentation is being given by Rebecca Budinger Mulhern, and I saw Rebecca present at the Association of Small and Rural Libraries Conference in Utah back in September 2017. And she gave a great presentation. She has a lot of energy. She had great ideas. She had a lot of great audience participation. I hope you bring your ideas today as well so we can share some of those. And I think you'll really enjoy today's presentation. So Rebecca, whenever you're ready.
Hello. Thank you, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm thankful that Jamie found me at the Association for Rural and Small Libraries Conference and that she felt this session was engaging. And I hope, this is my first webinar, so I hope I'm able to translate the energy that she mentioned and turn it into a webinar. So obviously it's a slightly different format when you don't have the immediate interaction with the audience, but I'm hoping that we have enough to go on. I am going to ask toward the end of the hour that we take some time to hear some of your suggestions for merchandising techniques, things that you've tried, things that you've thought about, questions, so that we do get a little bit of interaction at the end of it. You can type your questions in for Jamie. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am from Western New York, also Great Lakes area, so I can appreciate the conversation about the weather, although the snow that you guys got not too long ago turned into rain by the time it got to us last week, so we have been snow-free for a little while now. I am near Rochester, New York, about 30 miles. I live in Rochester, but I work about 30 to 40 miles south of Rochester, New York. And I'm originally born in Buffalo, so I definitely can appreciate the snow belt of the Great Lakes. I grew up in a small rural town of about 1,100 people called Angelica, New York. It is actually named for Alexander Hamilton's sister-in-law and love interest, Angelica Church, and she is well, Angelica Schuyler, if you're a fan of the musical. Her son founded the town, named it for her, and designed it to look like Paris with a park circle in the middle and streets with spokes that go out. So if you ever want to do a history webinar about Alexander Hamilton, I'm your girl there too. I did have a love affair with my town library, and it was open on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturday mornings, and Mrs. Feldbauer was my librarian, and she knew exactly what I'd like to read, and she would have it ready for me. So I know that being areas where we work are filled with rural and small libraries, I know you probably all have someone in your life like that, or maybe you are that person for someone else. Now I am in the town of, I work in the town of Avon, which looks like Avon, but it's pronounced Avon. And they're about 7,200. They are a bedroom community, or we are a bedroom community of Rochester, even though we're technically in another county and they don't like to admit it. We do have a lot of people who commute. So there are some merchandising opportunities, even in that little tidbit. We'll talk about that. I'll go ahead and take you to the first intro slide. I can tell you a little bit more about myself. That's me. Rochester's known for its lilacs, and so I had my picture taken in front of my lilacs for like sort of a headshot. And there, my contact information will be on the very last screen, including my email, so you'll be able to grab it there if you'd like to follow up with me in the future. So my background is, I think, does speak to my passion for merchandising and visuals. I was, in college, I was a double major, theater arts and English literature. My theater arts was actually theater tech. So I was very interested in the set design and the painting and the presentation. And also, interestingly, being a stage manager is one of the best jobs you can have to prepare you for being a library director. It's all about human resources and managing personalities, both the public's and the staff's. So if you ever have the opportunity to hire a theater person, I suggest you consider that. And of course, my literature was helpful too, but really the theater is what prepared me for my career. I was with a major bookstore chain, Barnes& and Noble, for almost 18 years. The majority of that, like 17 of it, was as a community relations manager and as a community relations manager trainer for the Northeast. What is a community relations manager? That is a person who works with schools and libraries and local authors for fundraisers. We help with book signings and do all sorts of fun stuff. Really, to me, it was the best job in the store. And basically, my husband still works for the company, and we decided that having all our eggs in that one basket in a changing industry was not the best idea. And somebody came to me and said, there's this great library in Avon, New York that's looking for a director, and we think you would be a really good fit. And that's how I went from the book selling business to the library world. One of the things my board told me when they hired me was that part of what they liked was my sales and merchandising background. So those are tools that aren't something you learn in library school necessarily. And so to bring those real life skills into the library was something I was very excited to do. And so we will go ahead and head over to our merchandising conversation. So a lot of times folks get merchandising confused with marketing. I've had people ask me to do the marketing presentation, and the way I define the two is merchandising is display driven. It's how you display things within your library, how you promote books in displays, etc. And marketing is reaching beyond the library. It's your signage, your social media. It's how you promote and do PR beyond the library. So just to get that out there. General philosophy of merchandising. There are different ways to look at merchandising, and one of the first ones that I believe in is put what they want where they can find it. Something that's kind of interesting if you're familiar, obviously if you're familiar with grocery stores, but there's sort of a theory of where they put the milk in grocery stores. And if you think about where they put the milk, it's usually the dairy section, so milk and butter is in the back of the store, because milk has always been one of the most highly purchased items. And being from Wisconsin, I'm sure that you would agree. By the way, Avon is also known for its cow farms, and or the dairy farms, and so we can appreciate the whole concept of the importance of farming here. We have an annual corn festival, if that tells you anything. But back to the theory of grocery stores and milk. So they put that in the very back because they figure by the time you get to the thing you came for, the milk being in the back of the grocery store, you've probably filled your basket with other items. Interestingly, if you think about bookstores and you think about Barnes& and Noble or Borders specifically, where did they put the bestsellers? The top 20, the top 10 nonfiction and fiction hardcover bestsellers. They were typically in the front of the store. So that is the opposite of the milk theory, putting the milk in the back. So I think bookstores and by association libraries are looking at their customers, and I will probably refer to them as customers, a little differently. We understand that people's time is valuable. Also, our product is different. People are looking for something they didn't know they were looking for sometimes. But when they put what they want where they can find it, it's respecting their time by putting it near the front. So that gives them the opportunity to stumble upon that. And then if they want to look further, then we give them the possibility to make discoveries. So encouraging patrons to make discoveries, and we do this all the time. This is what merchandising is really about, is suggestive selling. I like to say, let's help them make happy accidents. things they didn't even know that they were looking for. And I think of this as a sort of a theory of browsability. And you can do this with displays in different subject areas. But I also want to talk a little bit about nonfiction. And I think one of the things that I come from the bookstore with is a philosophy of browsability, where, no disrespect to Mr. Dewey, I butt heads with the Dewey Decimal System sometimes. I have for 18 years had a certain flow of what would be nonfiction section from working in the bookstore. And if you have had the occasion to hear of Glades, I'm going to show you. Glades is a way to organize your nonfiction section into subjects that still honor Dewey within each subject, but they use a color code system to come up with categories. I don't know if any of you use Glades. We can talk about that at the end if anyone already has them. And if you do already know about them, I hope I'm not preaching to the choir, but this is fairly new in our area. It's also similar to BISAC organization. I don't do this yet, but I aspire to do this. We hope to do this maybe after the current renovation that we're going through. So if you can see on the screen, I hope everybody can see that I've gone to a website for a library called the Manchester Community Library in, let's see, they're Vermont, that's right. And so they have reorganized their library using Glades. So first of all, they're showing you that they have a grab and go category here on their website. And by the way, it's really nice that they have this laid out on the website for people who may not know how their library is organized. They also have a fiction section, obviously. They've broken out mysteries and then large print and reference. And then they have a whole description here about their nonfiction section. And even talking about where the Dewey Decimal System comes from. So they gave him some props, a little bit of information. But they're talking also about how libraries have begun to move away from Dewey into a more, quote unquote, user-friendly, or as I would like to say, browsable bookstore-style layout, such as the BISAC system. And that some libraries are replacing their Dewey systems with similar BISAC, or as they do, the Glade system of shelving the library collection. So this particular library has broken it out into 11 color-coded Glades, and each one consists of a number of subcategories. And then within each of these categories, you would still have your Dewey Decimal number on the spine label of the book, and then within the category, they would be shelved according to its location in the Dewey Decimal System. But it just provides a way of pulling together categories that are similar or feed each other, but maybe end up in totally different areas of Dewey. One of my examples is taking the baby name books out of the 900s, like in the heraldry section, and putting them closer to pregnancy and childbirth and baby books about raising babies. So that way they don't have to hunt for it, it's right there together. So if you have a chance, check out this website or Google Glades and Libraries, Dewey Nonfiction, see if you can come up with any other libraries who do it or any other models. And it's just something to explore. No disrespect to Mr. Dewey, but I think that the way people shop now is different, and people are looking to find their categories kind of bundled together. And so this is a good possibility, and I hope to be one of the first ones to do it in my library system. Nobody else has done it yet, so.
I'm going to politely interrupt Rebecca
Sure.
For a second. Yeah. So I threw a question to our audience. I threw a question in our question box. Rebecca talked about happy accidents, and I posed the question: what about your library? Do your patrons ever have happy accidents at your library? And if they do, what types of things do they find that they don't necessarily expect? Also, please chime in if any of you are using the Glades system and let us know how that's worked for you. I can share that with the group. So you can type those responses in your question box. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And please, Jamie, feel free to chime in anytime.
I will.
Because it gave me a chance to get a drink of water.
Exactly.
Right? Because one of the things with being under construction, today they're doing a lot of sawing. They're installing our new cabinets. So there's a lot of sawdust in the air. So everything just feels dry right now. So, but I'm not complaining. It's all in the name of progress.
Exactly.
In fact, I went downstairs and I said to the guys, I said, hey guys, I'm giving this webinar on our time from 2 to 3. Do you think you could not make any noise right under me? And they were like, they're good guys. They're funny. They're like, oh, that's where all the stuff is that we have to do right now is right under your office. So I said, you know what? If you make noise, it'll just give a little flavor to the webinar. And it's just all in the name of progress.
Exactly.
That's how exciting things are in my library right now. So okay, so let's go back to the merchandising. So encourage your patrons to make discoveries. Let's see, I talked about Glades, and then really my other philosophy is have fun. You know, you should be having fun, your staff should be having fun, your patrons should be having fun making these discoveries, laughing at your displays or your creativity, engaging in books they maybe wouldn't have normally engaged with. And so it's really just everything should be positive. When I came to this library about 4.5 years ago, I followed a director who'd been here for 25 years, and you know, she'd been in the library for a long time, and was a little bit controlling about some of the things, and the staff was not allowed to do displays. And I didn't really know that, and the first time that I said, you know, hey, so and so, would you mind doing a display for New Year, New You, January kind of stuff on top of this bookshelf? And she just looked at me and was like, really? I can do that? And I said, yeah, see what you come up with. And she said, I feel so empowered. And I thought, wow. In my mind, I had just asked her to do a display, which in the bookstore we did all the time. But just that little piece of it gave her this opportunity to put something together that she'd never been allowed to do before or been able to do. And so that was just kind of a cool thing to have. Something like putting a display means so much to an employee. And that's, you know, one example of the power of having fun and of merchandising. So we'll take a look now at the entrance to my library. It's an historic building, 1927, originally built to be a library. This room, this is the main floor. We're not changing this a whole lot as far as the renovation goes. Most of the renovation is happening downstairs in our children's room, and then we're expanding a meeting room, and we're taking storage area and making it into a public small study room. There'll be a lot of glass so that we have access and we can see. So the downstairs has a very different flavor than the historic upstairs. But we're not really looking at the building, we're taking a look here at the merchandising. So when you first walk into the building from the front doors, currently you run into this front set of shelving, and then it goes to the side on the left and the right at an angle. So it's like a half circle of bookshelves. And when you first walk in, I have split the shelving. On the left is nonfiction, and on the right is fiction. And that's better. Probably can see it better now. You can tell by the books that are out when I took this picture. So it's been a little while. Also, the fall decor gives that hint too. So when you come in, we are putting our best sellers, new nonfiction, and then new fiction right out for folks to see. So that you can engage with them right away. When I first started at this library, the new fiction was actually kind of buried in the fiction section, which didn't make sense to me from my bookstore experience. So I moved it, and this whole front was originally nonfiction, and then so I moved it and I split it between fiction and nonfiction. And it's interesting when you start somewhere new and you start doing new things. So I'll talk to you about some of the responses I had. From a lot of people, I had really positive responses. The library is blossomed. There's one woman, I had just done the annual planting in the spring, and she came up to me and she said, I just have to tell you, the library is blossoming inside and out. There's color, there's display, it looks so lovely. And then on the other hand, I did hear from people who were more like a more traditional library that it felt cluttered, it felt loud. And so I took the opportunity to talk to some of those people and explain my philosophy and why I was putting things where I was putting them, and also that the new books were circulating better than they were before. One thing that I had not anticipated is that when I moved the new fiction from being in fiction to the front, it had previously been next to a table with chairs. And I didn't realize that some of the older patrons who are a little more physically challenged liked it because it was next to the table and they could sit and browse the section. So in what I did was, I'll go back there. I added the chairs that weren't there before, and just in having that conversation, let me go back. Sorry, by the way, I'm using Prezi. If anyone has ever, Prezi is a website that helps you make these presentations. So I added these chairs so that people had a sitting area, and I also added shopping baskets. So if you can see here, little shopping baskets that they can fill up and fill their books up and then take them to the counter. And if they walk around with their hands full, or if I see them pulling out books, I'm happy to walk over, or the staff will walk over and say, you know, can I take that for you and hold them at the desk while you continue shopping? That's the customer service part in supporting your merchandising. So sometimes making these changes, you think something's really not a big deal or it just makes total sense, but then other people have a different perspective on it. And so those were customer service opportunities. They were a chance for me to meet people who to the community where I was new, and to have those problem-solving conversations. You know, to say, well, I'm not going to move the books back because they're doing really well here, but let's see if we can meet in the middle and provide seating for you. And so far, it's worked, and I think it's been a positive.
Rebecca?
Yeah.
I just noticed that you said when you were talking about people filling up, or if their hands are full with books,
Mm-hmm.
that you said, I will take these to the front while you continue shopping. Do you say that out of habit, being from Barnes and Noble, or is there a strategy in using the word shopping instead of browsing? I noticed that.
It could be both. You know, and I think, you know, we all have these conversations about what do we call the people who use the library? Do
Right.
we call them users? Do we call them patrons? Patrons is a very library-oriented
Mm-hmm.
speak, and it's an internal speak. Like actually now, um, one of the things we are replacing in the main level of the library is the quote-unquote circulation desk. And I am retraining myself to now call it the customer service desk, because circulation, that terminology is internal. It doesn't mean anything
Exactly.
to our public.
Right.
And as far as they're concerned, that's where they get their service, and it's customer service. So I guess I'm trying to I've picked up the terminology of patron and circulation, but I'm trying to retrain myself to bring the library along with me and maybe call them you know, call them customers or call it shopping. It's the best kind of shopping. It's free shopping.
Exactly.
So
Cool.
if you're going to shop, why not shop here?
Exactly. I wanted to ask while it was fresh in my mind.
Fresh?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the questions in the middle. So as I'm talking about the setup of the entrance to the library, I took advantage of it by moving these books right to the front when you walk in the front doors. However, that is also something else we're going to change with the renovation. We are going to get new bookshelves. They are double bay, two-sided, mobile units. I'm so excited. They're going to have wheels, and it's going to open up so that when you first walk in the library, you will have a direct sight line all the way back to the fireplace. So, but you will walk through between these shelving units that will be on the left and right, and they still will have new nonfiction and new fiction, but you'll walk between them and you'll be able to see the historic fireplace, which you can't see in these photos, but right above it is a portrait of the man who built the library. And there's comfortable seating and our local history section. I pulled that all out of nonfiction. So I have kind of started to dabble in Glades, but not officially. So I pulled out any books that had to do with our region, whether nonfiction, whether they're, books about the transportation, because we have the Erie Canal. So there are a lot of books about the Erie Canal that live in the transportation section. We have books that of course are in the regional area. So 974, all those came out. Famous biographies of the area, those are all pulled out and they're put in a local interest section, which is, you can actually just see it in this photo. Let me move my webinar there. So this is our local interest section right here, and it's right next to the fireplaces, next to the beautiful windows that are west facing, so they get light into the evening. And then I have some historic photos of the library up on the top shelf, and just kind of ties it all together that this is a cozy nod to the history of our building and a history of the town. And that will stay there after the renovation. The local history section will stay right next to the fireplace. And I think it'll be a great cozy area for folks. So let's go back one. I also want to show you, this is a different side, but still near when you walk in. So when you first walk in, you had adult fiction and nonfiction. And on this other display case, the back side of it is audiobooks. But what we have here, we do subject and maybe seasonal displays on top. We have new teen books here. But one thing we do with teen is actually located upstairs in a loft that overlooks this great room. And because it's sort of pulled away, I wanted to try and expose the new teen fiction to the adults as well. When I first started, we didn't have a lot of teens that came to the library. They were kind of discouraged. Actually, there were signs up that said, teens, no backpacks, no book bags up in the teen loft, turn them in at the desk. Not very inviting. I changed all that. I bought some cool steampunky posters, put signs to the teen loft, but I wanted to also just get the books in front of more people. And so when books come into our library, they are quote unquote new for 6 months, but for teen, they're still new for 6 months, but the first 3 months, they actually go on display right down in the adult section, just off to the side from new fiction. And then the second 3 months, then they go upstairs into a new section up in the loft. So this way, we've been getting a little more exposure for those teen novels. I love seeing adults who have gotten into them, who get excited for the new books to come out. So that's pretty cool. Also, we have a staff pick bay. Terminology from the bookstore, we use shelf talkers. Shelf talkers they're really anything that you put on the edge of the shelf that help give a description. So in this case, it's actually the names of our employees, of our library clerks, and then the book that they are promoting. But in this case, the shelf talker is actually telling you it's new teen books. So they can serve different purposes. You can even get shelf talkers that hang off the shelf. You can print out little slips that say, this is why I love this book. And then your employee can handwrite what they love about this book. One of the things you're going to, there's some things that are challenges from the bookstore to the library. When we did things like this in the bookstore, we had a stock of like 6 copies to put behind the book that was the staff pick. So when the first one sold, someone could just replace it with another one of the same title. Well, libraries don't have that kind of depth of stock of one title typically. So you may have to get have maybe a list of what different employees like to read in case they're not working the day that their book checks out. Or you can do what our library did, and it sort of became a way to play jokes on the other employees. So when one of the staff picks would go out for an employee, you never know. The next day, the tradesman's guide to putting in a septic well might show up on their staff pick. And then they would come in and say, hey, who did that to me? That's not funny. So we all kind of get at each other a little bit, and have some fun with funny subjects. Nothing too radical, but just something that's a little fun. Hey, if you don't let us know what you like, we're going to make it up for you. You might not want that. So that's the staff pick area. And then also, in an attempt to highlight, we now subscribe to, at a system level, we subscribe to Mango Languages. And I had some promotional materials from Mango on this shelf here. Mango is an online language learning service. But I also wanted to pull out of nonfiction our audio that teach you languages. And so I have this this here that says, be an armchair traveler, try learning a new language. And I made this language section right here just before regular audiobooks start on the back side. So it does kind of tie in. So that's all about the entrance. Regular displays. One of the things about we do these displays on the top. Actually, I'll talk about this on the next slide too, because there's kind of an unexpected hazards of doing all this new merchandising. We'll talk about it in the next section. So the power of display. So here's some ideas that you can try. A display that if you loved this, try this other one, which I think is especially important for libraries, because if you only have a few copies of something, especially if it's a new bestseller, you want to give something that people can read in the meantime that's similar, that they might enjoy this author because they like this author. This can also and should happen at the customer service touch points. So your staff should be able to have conversations. I don't mean about every author, but especially if they have an author that they love or a topic that they love, or even movies. If you loved this director, oh, you should check out this other one. Those are conversations that can be had between your staff and the patrons, the customers. To help with suggestive selling. You can also there are websites you can use like Goodreads that will help you look up. Someone comes in and says, I really enjoyed this author, but I don't know what to read next, or all his books are checked out while I'm waiting. What can I read? They should be able to look that up and help with that. So another benefit of what is the power of display is new life to your current collection. So your books need to pay the rent. We are not museums, even though it's really hard to get rid of some of those books that have been there a long time and maybe they're a classic. The exception to that rule, I think, are regional books, local history books, or local author books. You may want to reconsider that, but books really need to pay the rent. And so we have found, by coming up with new creative display ideas, we have given new life to some parts of the collection that really have just been sitting on the shelf. And that's a really good thing. It's allowing these books to pay the rent. However, the backside, which is a good problem to have, is that it makes it harder to weed, because you look up the circulation of these titles and they hadn't gone out for 2 years, but then last year they went out 3 times. So that's usually a direct result to the books now being in on new displays. So again, it's a good problem to have. I would rather have the books that we own go out. But when you are small libraries like we are, and I know many of you are, you have to make room for the new collection, the new incoming titles. So sometimes hard decisions have to be made, or maybe you gave a collection the last hurrah before you did in fact weed them. So Another power of display is that they can be used as location guides. And this is something that definitely happens in the bookstores. So when you think about a Barnes& and Noble or a Borders or an independent, they a lot of times have slat wall end caps. And the slat wall, especially in the nonfiction areas where you had a lot of changing subject as you went from row to row or aisle to aisle, the end caps would be used as highlighting what subjects could be found down a particular aisle. So you might have newest the newest science books on an end cap, and that's meant to be an indicator that you are getting close to the science section. Now, we, of course, can have signage, we can have the Dewey numbers put on the end caps. If you're doing glades, you could use the color coding for the glades and say, you know, this topic this way. But I think it's still fun to highlight it with some of the new books that would be found in that section. And atmosphere. So your displays set the tone for your library. Think back to that comment that I had from one of my new customers or patrons where she said, it's blooming inside and out. You know, this is a beautiful building, but all of a sudden they were seeing the collection in a new light. It was setting the tone of freshness and reminding people that different things were happening by the displays, or that we were going through different seasons or different times of year. So it really can set the tone and create an atmosphere for your library. And so now we'll talk a little bit about trends. Definitely you want to take advantage of trends. Trends come in all shapes and sizes, and one thing you want to do is check the calendar. I know you're all, you know how to put holiday books out before Christmas, you know how to do New Year, New You in January. But if there's a lot more, a couple things I can suggest. One of the things that's not in this display, so if you're taking notes, you might want to write it down. If you don't already follow Sandra Boynton on Facebook, she's a hoot, and she has an illustration for every single day of the year. Like yesterday was Penguins Day, and she had the cutest penguins. Now, obviously, if you follow her, you're gonna find out the day of that was an important day. But if you follow her for a year, you can start to take notes or remember. But there are also ways you can look these things up. There's Chase's calendar of events, which I believe is now online only. It used to be physically produced. But that has all sorts of festivals and holidays and famous persons' birthdays. Calendars can be a really great way to inspire displays.
Rebecca?
Yes, Jamie.
What was the name of the Facebook person again?
So I'll pull it up. Sandra Boynton. She's an author of board books. You know her. I know you do. That's me. So Sandra Boynton, her Facebook feed is awesome. She makes, you totally know her. I'm trying to think of the children's books that she does, like Barnyard Dance, and there's their Bad Appreciation Day, and it's upside down. Like, how cute is that? But she's just really creative, and she comes up with fun ways to just highlight different holidays, and it's just kind of a different fun thing to do. And she keeps me on my toes, and I find myself sharing her posts quite a bit because they're just super adorable. So she's a good one to follow. Go back to my, oh, I know it's always behind there it is. Bloop. Okay, so check the calendar. And as an example, I took a photo of a display that I had done. Obviously, it was in the fall when I took the earlier pictures. This was around election time, 2017, 16. So there were politics, American flags. One of the other things you can do is if you provide services to your community that maybe tie into something that's happening. My example here would be, and I don't have a photo of it, but we always have voter registration forms available, and I have a sign that says, you know, Uncle Sam wants you to vote, do your civic duty. And so you can incorporate something like that into a display of political books around the season of politics. One side note that's kind of interesting, and it's this, I haven't seen it or heard it in my library yet, so I hope that means I'm doing a good job. But in the bookstores, people felt free to tell us, to count and tell us that we had more of one political persuasion's books on a display than the opposing view. People would regularly walk through and turn around books that were by somebody that they did not support. So they would turn the books around as opposed to having them faced out. And that's terminology. Face out means that the book, that's sort of bookstore terminology. So the book is literally faced out, so you see the front. And then the alternative to that is spined. So if the spines are facing out, if you hear me say those, that's sort of bookstore lingo, which does apply to the library. But so sometimes if your display topic can be a little controversial, you may get feedback. So just be prepared for that. There was also another funny story is that with the bookstore, Barnes & Noble, they always put their discount stickers in the same place, the upper right corner. And so sometimes that would make for inconvenient situations, like the author who put his face that landed in the upper right corner of the book, and we had to put the discount sticker on his face, and he happened to be a political a political pundit, and did news programs, and he complained about Barnes & Noble covering up his face, that we were against what he was saying. It just happened that that was where his face was on his book, and his publisher should have known better if they wanted it to be a bestseller. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Also, here you have an example of, this was our summer reading program a couple years ago about heroes, when it tied in with the hero theme. This was for the adults. And I took a sign that's used some of the official graphics, Escape the Ordinary, and I wrote, who is your hero? And I did one on a nonfiction display, and then I did one on a fiction display, and kind of I wanted to promote it as, who is your nonfiction hero? And library users and customers would actually write on the sticky note, someone that they admired from history or currently, and they put them on both sides of the sign. And then the same thing in fiction. So we got like Sherlock Holmes and Janet Ivanovich, or different fictional characters were on some of the fiction ones too. So that was a kind of a fun way to get people to interact with the display. So it's a good way to keep them interested because we're asking for their input. You could also do a patron pick, or library users promotions, like if they wanted to have a title that they wanted to put on their display, or an adopt a shelf kind of thing. That's another good way to put that in there too. And then the other thing you definitely want to keep an eye on is pop culture and things that are in the news. Barnes & Noble always has an in the news end cap. So that could also be controversial. Most likely it'll be somewhat political. It could be the Avengers. It could be new movies that are coming out. It could be Harry Potter. Really it's kind of endless with the news cycles that we have. It could be that there's a certain country where something happened, and so you can go and pull out informational books about that country and put them on the display. During Brexit, you could have put out books about the history of England, or its relationship to the European Union, or any of that, to try and promote those pieces. Oh, can you hear that construction noise? I don't know, I can. Okay, so on to the next one, social media. So there's some really fun stuff that you can do with social media, and ways that you can use social media to your benefit. Has everyone heard of Bookface by this point? I would assume that some of you have participated in Bookface. I'm about to show you my Bookface that I did, all because of the curly hair, that I was able to become Jimi Hendrix. So I'd love to see some of your book faces if anyone wants to send them to me or put them, have them on your Facebook page. Challenge the public, challenge your staff to do book faces and share those. And you could print them out and make a sign from it and put the sign up in your space. And then do a display of books that have faces on them, and then show that you've got that, there's potential to do book face on these. That's really kind of fun. Also, mystery books. This is not one of my photos. I took this from the interwebs, but I'm sure many of you have done this where the book itself is the mystery. Is it a thriller? Is it a romance? And then you put a theme on the front of it, or you bundle a couple books and then you have the barcodes on the outside so the staff can still check them out, but the public doesn't know what they are until they open them at home. That's always a lot of fun. You definitely want to use Pinterest, and if you for example, I have a board on my Pinterest page, my personal Pinterest page, of just library ideas. And I'm sure some of you have done some of these or even posted some that you've created. So some really cool stuff like using color. I'm a big color person. As an aside, I don't know if you've ever heard of something called synesthesia, but it's a thing where people see color when they hear music. They see it in their heads. Or, for example, for me, all of my letters and numbers have a specific color, and I thought everybody saw them that way, but it wasn't until somebody asked me, why are your A's always yellow? And I was like, duh, aren't everybody's A's yellow? And they were like, no, mine are black. All my numbers and letters are black. So I see color in a lot of things, and I use color a lot. So I encourage you to use color as a visual. You can even use it in this, like in this case, to pull a whole display together. Because how many times has that person come in and said, oh, there was that book that was on display and it had a blue cover, of course, and yet because we're awesome, we almost always figure out what book it was. So use Pinterest. Pinterest is your friend. I also have I run the adult crafts here, so I have a lot of adult crafting ideas from Pinterest, but use it for displays. There's so many cool things that you can do from Pinterest. So we're gonna get back to the full screen, which is hidden. There we go. Okay. I'm trying to keep moving so we can get some of your conversation in at the end too. So under community is another way that you can support your display and your merchandising. Local festivals, local history anniversaries, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Greater Rochester Teen Book Festival. But specifically, like with local history anniversaries, Frederick Douglass is a huge figure in our area's history. And it is his 200th birthday this year. And so there are lots of things happening with Frederick Douglass. So we have all these biographies of Frederick Douglass. We have the books, the narratives that he wrote about escaping slavehood and then coming to the North and starting his newspaper, the North Star. Also, Rochester is the home of Susan B. Anthony and the women's movement, the women's right to vote, women's suffrage, and 2 years ago was the big anniversary of women's suffrage, and so that has been a huge topic locally as well. So I wonder, in your area, you probably have a lot of Native American history. I can tell by a lot of the names. You have pioneer history. I know Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House in the Big Woods, was in Wisconsin. I don't know if it was in any of your areas, but I am a Laura Ingalls fan, so I do know that. So those are things you would consider. Rochester has a Greater Rochester Teen Book Festival. It is huge. I encourage you to check out the website for this. It is unprecedentedly large. It is like 30 authors coming and a parade of cars and teens screaming their head off, and it's just a great party. But I'd like to do a display to support that. And I do it right in the adult section because, again, you get that crossover. You get people who are interested. I put the brochures for the current, it happens in May, so I put the brochures out, reminding people when it is, and then we help feed the people attending. They get 2,500 teens and schools, libraries take people. Just it is this huge party, and it's really awesome. So that's another cool one. So there's the display for the Teen Book Festival. Let's Talk TBF was my sign. By the way, these older signs in these pictures were made in Publisher, but I have since come to discover Canva, C-A-N-V-A. It is canva.com. If you can produce your tax exempt certification, you can get a free tax exempt version of Canva. And it first of all, it's a really cool software to use, but it is also provides you with photos that are legal access for you. You have permission to use these photos, so you're not going to run into the chance of, gee, I took this photo from the internet and I used it in some promotion. I hope I don't get sued. Canva, all of their photos are user friendly and have permission to use them. So. And then this is an example of another photo of the Teen Book Festival display with a whole bunch of the authors who were coming to the Teen Book Festival that year. And another view of the library in the background. And right in here, down here, you've got the staff pics again. So. And then lastly, we wanted to talk about having fun. So we've talked already a couple times because it's come up about the staff pick bay, using shelf talkers, and yes, how we like to have fun at each other's expense. And then display challenges. One thing there is a sense of competition with the staff pick bay. Ooh, Mary Lou, your book has already been replaced twice today, and we sort of keep track, get to see who's really good at picking the books that people like to take out. So that's kind of fun. But you can also do a display challenge, and we did this in the bookstore a little bit. So we would get a group of employees and they would have a dedicated end cap, and they would come up with a theme, and for a certain given amount of time you could compete with another end cap to see whose end cap, quote unquote, sold the most books or circulated the most books, and then just have a little friendly competition, maybe with a pizza party at the end or something. Also, when it goes back to the theme, but this is kind of like the calendar we talked about earlier, this was something we did last year for April is National Poetry Month. And I didn't have room this year because of the renovation. We've actually squeezed our children's section into the main floor of the library. So the poetry stayed in the attic this year. But it was a fun way to highlight poetry, which of course is, again, one of those sections that doesn't circulate a lot. But when you do a display like this, suddenly they're circulating again. So it, again, breathes new life into an older collection. And that is pretty much the presentation. We have just a few minutes, actually, if Jamie wants to bring up any questions or any ideas that people had. And there's my contact information too.
Wow, thank you so much, Rebecca. As Rebecca said, we do have a few minutes left for questions. If anyone wants to ask anything, you can go ahead and type that in the question box. There was a question that came through about 10, 15 minutes ago that I posted to the chat box, and we did get some nice responses to that. And the question was, does anyone have problems where customers hesitate to touch displays because they don't want to mess them up by removing a book? Have you had anything like that at your library, Rebecca?
I've had that verbalized, like, oh, I'm so sorry to mess up your displays, but I'm taking this. So I think it's more of in a joke way, like, oh, you just did so much work to make this a display, but I'm going to take it anyway. So I don't mind that. I think it's kind of cute that they think about that. But then it's cute because they can't help themselves either. Like, they feel bad undoing something, but then it's like, no, do it. Thank you. That's exactly why we do this,
Right. What was about when you worked at Barnes and Noble? What was the length of time that usually a display stayed up, or how often would you change things up at Barnes and Noble?
So there were different types of displays. So bestsellers were up for the week. I mean, every week we updated what the current bestseller list was. Now, some books stayed on the bestseller list for weeks and weeks and weeks, so that was one thing. It's interesting in the bookstore because the longer I worked there, the real estate was for sale. So publishers started to pay to have their books on end caps. And so the longer I was there was less and less freedom for individual creativity when it came to displays.
Okay.
And then there was more of a push to sort of have this homogenous experience, this brand reinforced experience in any Barnes and Noble you went into. So, it can be a good or a bad thing. You know what you're getting, but from a staff level or a local interest level, it had a little less intimacy than just everybody has exactly the same thing. But to your answer there, I would say some displays were 2 weeks, some were a month, depending on where they were and what their purpose was.
Catherine says, I keep my displays up for a month at a time unless it's an event book display that needs to be more timely. So that's great.
Right.
A question came in from Emily. Is there a resource where we can read about blades and how to set it up if we want to do it at our library?
So I don't have one on hand, but I bet Jamie, between the two of us, we could come up with some websites that you could send out afterwards, maybe.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. We'll come up with a couple. Certainly check out, go to this website, check out this library's website. But
So that's
we're librarians. Google.
Okay.
No, we'll come up with some resources just to give you some information. Yeah, we'll come up with something.
Definitely. And then Gail asks, do you have a display budget?
Interesting. I don't. So another thing about being at the bookstore, when I first started there, we put a lot of stuff on the displays. Like for Banned Book Week, you put logs and you put fire coming out of the logs and you do all that. And I know if you look at the Pinterest page that we had up, there was quite a bit of that, right? Like look at this Harry Potter one, dude, that's so cool. And even this Starbucks one. But as we went longer at the bookstore, they felt like less was more. I think part of it was they didn't want to have stores spending money on, display enhancements. But there is something to be said for letting the books tell the story of the display. And I like to challenge the readers to figure out why I put these 3 books together, because sometimes they all have similar covers, or they all are about, they all have the word doll in the title, or, something like that. So I don't have a budget, but we are a creative lot, and I think you can find you could roll it into a programming budget. I'm sure there's been times where I've stolen from a programming budget to buy a couple display things, but I tend to look for things that are free.
I've seen people use a lot of Baker and Taylor boxes to play with the heights, covering Baker and Taylor book boxes with cheap cloth or craft or fabric or wrapping paper. I've seen people make easels out of paper toweling tubes or things that you have in the. I mean, really some interesting. I saw a Western display where someone had like handkerchief and he had like a cactus cutout, and so I don't think he had a budget at all, and he was using all just reused materials. Didn't have to spend a lot of money.
It's important too. I mean, part of the reason we did this talk was because we're for rural and small libraries originally, and you have limited space and limited budget. So it's how do you do some merchandising without needing a budget? I suppose part of my supply budget does technically go to display. Like I buy easels for displays. I might buy a few things here, like the clear plexi sign holders. I invested in those early on, and they weren't cheap, but they're reusable, which is great. So, but specifically, I don't have a programming budget. I think we are creative, and we come up, or we're resourceful too. You know that one local patron who runs this business who always has this product left over from what he makes. Like he might always have tubes of something, or you find ways to see what's around you and how can you use it.
Exactly. Well, we are
Yep.
just about out of time. Rebecca, I want
Sure.
to thank you for an awesome presentation.
Oh, thank
Audience,
you.
audience, thank you for all of your questions and comments and sharing of your ideas. That certainly helps enrich a program like this one when we're sharing creativity with one another. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. The recording of this presentation will be available on our website hopefully tomorrow. So long, everybody. Bye-bye.